Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who's listening to this asynchronously via the Temple Beth Am podcast. Speaking of the podcast, coming soon will be the podcast version of last night's Dreaming About Israel at 100 program with Rabbis Elazar Muskin and Noah Farkas and Dara Fremer, and it was really, if I may say so myself, illuminating and worth your investment of time. So you can watch it on the YouTube through the Shul's channel, or wait for it to come out on an audio podcast. We are going to jump right in. I think I just read through the second of a couple of verses at which Rashi is quiet, and let's just kind of get going so we can move forward to the next verse that has Rashi. So I always forget. Okay, so chapter 7, verse 21, the aftermath, or maybe the better way of saying it is the impact of the first plague. Chapter 7, verse 21, V'hadaga asher bayaor, the fish, which doesn't refer obviously to a single organism, although wait for that, because when we get to the frogs, Rashi is going to say something.
Oh, yes.
Like that. Yeah, Alan knows that one.
Yeah.
The fish, meaning the marine life, if we were to use our English way of referring to that kind of thing, that was in the river. And we went through before why the Nile is referred to as the Yaor, because Yaor is kind of a irrigation channels, and that's the way the Nile actually irrigated Egypt. Meta, died. Vayiv ash hayaor, the river was foul or smelled. V'lo yachlu Mitzrayim, and Egypt could not drink, lishto, to drink. Mayim min hayaor, the water from the river. Vayehi hadam b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and the blood was throughout the land of Egypt. Okay, second, someone's coming onto the Zoom. So that's where we left things off. The second of two verses in a row, I think, where Rashi does not say anything. The two verses or one verse? I think it's two verses. And we read that verse last week. I don't think we had time to really linger on that verse. So did anyone have a comment or a question on that verse before we jump into verse 22, where Rashi begins to pick up again? Going once? Okay, going twice. Let's read verse 22. Joel, do you want to read? Remember, if you're in the room, project, because I think the audio is only coming in through my computer, and we want to make sure that people can hear you.
ויעשו כן חרטומי מצרים בלקחיהם ויחזק לב פרעה ולא שמע עליהם כאשר דיבר אדוני.
Okay.
And the magicians of Mitzrayim did thusly with their, we had that word before,
Right.
we don't know, lights or something, words, and Paro's heart was hardened, and he did not heed them as God had said.
Good. And if you want to remind yourself where Latehem came in, it was back in verse 11. If you just compare verse 11, this verse, this is in the initial scene where they're just kind of establishing Moshe and Aaron's presence and the scene of turning the rods into the snakes. In verse 11, Vayikra gam paro lachachamim v'lamechashafim, and Pharaoh also called, and this is where we discussed, are these plural nouns referring to different, types of courtiers and magicians, or are they just synonyms? He called his wise ones and his magic makers Vayasu gamhem chartumei Mitzrayim, and those sorcerers of Egypt also did the same thing. Belahatehem came. So the difference is that in verse 11, it's with a hey, lahatehem, and in our verse, it's without the hey, it's latehem. And if you look back in verse 11, Rashi was comparing that to lahat, the flaming sword that that the Garden of Eden is protected by back in Breshit. But if you looked over at Onkelos on lahatehem, he translates lahatehem in verse 11 as lachashehon. Lachash means what in Aramaic or Hebrew? A whisper. Like he says that the lahat was not a physical thing, but the whispered means by which these incantations were done. Okay, that's how Unkelus translates it there. If you go to our verse, how does Unkelus translate latehem here without the hey? What's same thing, right? So according to Unkelus, these are the same words, right? If you were to interview Unkelus, would he say that it was a scribal error that the hey was added or omitted? We're not sure. But whatever he thinks the origin of the two words are, he translates them the exact same way, that this has to do with the whispered means by which the Egyptian magicians did their thing. Okay. Let's pause there. Anything else on the verse that raises a question? To me, there's at least a somewhat obvious question on the verse, but that doesn't mean that it's obvious to anyone else. Barry, and then Joel. A little bit louder, Barry. Yeah, I could tell by how you were clearing your voice you weren't going to speak loud enough. I'm a sorcerer, and I knew the future. Go ahead.
I'm speaking now.
Okay.
What did they do likewise?
Good. And what did they do likewise, and why do they do it? Because likewise would mean they also turned their water sources into blood. It's a very strange phrase. Like, we get the balance that, so we're going to have these moments where God's representatives on earth are going to do things that are hard to believe, and then Pharaoh's representatives are going to do the same thing. But you would like to think that the plot would make most sense if what Pharaoh's people did would be to undo what Moses did, but it doesn't say that. Just a vayasu chen.
Either that or something as crazy as turning everything to blood.
Right.
And what crazy thing did they do?
Good. Okay, so that is a like a classic question on this verse. Rashi is totally uninterested by that question. Doesn't mean that it's not a good question. I've always wondered what the Torah is trying to convey to us right there. Yeah, go ahead, Barry.
And another issue is in translation this of the key word is Volatehem. It's a magical incantation is what I have here. How do you make a magical incantation that is powerful and awesome? That's turning the whole country to blood.
Right. Another way of asking, what is it exactly that the Chartumei Mitzrayim did, and what was its impact? Joel?
I just had a grammatical question.
Go ahead.
Vayechazak, is that passive or active?
Right. It's a really good question. There is a category of verbs in Hebrew called stative verbs. And I used to be able to explain it better than I can now because it's been a long time since I studied it. But they're neither active nor passive, but they are describing a state of being. And we have words for them in English, but it's not a one-to-one match. So it's neither that the subject, the subject of the verb vayechazak is lev paro, but it's not that the heart of Pharaoh is doing a strengthening, is doing a hardening. It's describing
a descriptive state of being.
Correct. It's right. It's another state of verb in Hebrew, which is different in English, is sleep. When you say Adam Yashem, it's a verb, but it's a type of verb that's describing the way the person is in that moment. It's not actually an active verb. It's not Yoshen, right? Yoshen would have been like an active pa'al verb saying that the person is doing the activity of sleeping. It means the same thing, but in Hebrew, we're not saying the person is doing the activity of sleeping, but this verb describes the state that the person is in right now. And what state is that? It's a sleeping state. So here by Chazak Lev Paro, what is the current state of Lev Paro? It's Chazak, right? Not that it has happened to it, not that it is doing the Chazaking, it's just describing its way of being. It's almost like a verb acting as an adjective. It's almost coterminous with Lev Paro Chazak. Alan, excuse me.
So when you say, it says here it was hard. It didn't say it was hardened.
That's the translation you have?
Yeah, the translation I have is it was hard.
Oh,
Yeah.
It was hard.
Remained hard is interesting too. We don't have Larry in his translations, but let's look at some that are available on Sefaria.
because it was already hard in the previous with the rods.
Right. So I'm going to share the screen.
Saperstein says became hardened.
Well, Okay, so my translations here. Okay, so Everett Fox is the one on the screen, and Pharaoh's heart remained strong-willed, right? So the remained is sort of interesting. The word remain isn't there, but he's saying that the verb suggests an ongoing state of being. Okay, JPS. Pharaoh's heart stiffened. That works too, because it's not that it's saying it stiffened something else. It's describing the stiffened state of the heart, and it's trying to make sense of the fact that the verb is written in a direct verbal way and not as an adjectival way. Let's look at a few more. The Koran here, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So Koran reads it as a passive, even though it's not actually a passive verb. Mitsuda remained hardened. Was strengthened, because it's reading it as chazak, not kasher. Let's see what the old JPS did. Was hardened. And this is the one that we discovered. Torah Shara. Where'd it go? Oh, he turns it in a whole paragraph. The magicians of Egypt obtained water from the Hebrew settlements in Goshen and did the same as Aaron with their secret arts. So this is clearly a translation that is a commentary on a translation. So he's answering the same question Barry asked. What does it mean that they did? What do? They went to the places where the Israelites had fresh water and converted their water to blood, but they succeeded with the stagnant waters only and not with the flowing ones. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened and he did not listen to them. So clearly, this is a translation that's incorporating probably layers of midrash or just pure imagination on his part.
Can I do a scenario?
Yes.
I think probably the magicians took the water from Nile, which was red. Maybe they had something like bleach they put in. It became white, but immediately turned red because he had to deal with God. And Pharaoh was bullied, so he couldn't answer, but he still wanted to say his magicians can do. He went to his room, he closed the door.
Well, we're going to see him close the door in just a moment, actually. Rick?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to point out the 9 words here from Vayechezak to the end, to Dibir Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the same 9 words that we had in verse 13. All of verse 13, by the way. It's the same words, different trope for some of it. And then again, when we have Vayechezak in, that was 15. In 35, it's going to be the same deal. Velo shilach et bnei Yisrael. So it's a formula, that phrase from Vayechezak to Ka'asher Diber Adonai.
Right. It's a formula, and it suggests that we're in a narrative place where we're going to have repeating tropes, pun intended, right? Repeating musical tropes sometimes, or changing musical tropes, but repeating narrative and storyline tropes. Yeah. Barry?
I think what's significant to me is that these are not causative each time causing his heart to harden. Rather, it's an ongoing state of being. His heart all the way through is hardened. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of that has to do with what the story wants to say about Pharaoh. Some of it has to do with just the way the Hebrew verb operates in this situation. But we don't have to see it as a hardening, softening, but rather a reminder that this is the way this Pharaoh holds himself, right? Okay, Rashi does speak about something in this verse, but not what we have been talking about. So any other comments or questions before we get to the Rashi? Okay, Joel, sort aloud.
ולתיהם. לך אשר אומרים אותו בלט ובחשאי.
Okay, so the first thing he does is say, hey, reader, just as you were wondering what Lahatehem meant a few verses ago. You might be wondering what latehem means here, and you might be wondering for the same thing. And Rashi was saying, yes, it's the same thing, and I'm agreeing with Unkelus, and it's a lachash, it's a whisper. And now he tells you why he thinks the word latehem means lachash. So shomrim, what does he mean? Shomrim b'tobalat of a chashayim.
You say softly and secretly.
Right. So lat. Hava elcha shlach shir balat from Erev Shel Shoshanim. I will whisper you a song quietly. So Rashi is making, I think, a cute but etymologically incorrect association between the word latehem and balat here, saying it is something which is quiet. I could be wrong. Maybe that he's right, but I think he's sort of being more playful than accurate, and it's done in a secretive way, and that's why it's called a lot. And so they're lots, meaning they're secret whispers. They're whispered, they're sweet nothings. Okay, and then he continues.
Rabotenu amru belatehem maaseh shadim. The sages said, the rabbi said, the latehem is something with the ghost.
Yeah, ghost. A shade is a ghost or a demon, right? Keep going.
So he threw shade on it, yeah. Belatehem maaseh b'shafim.
Kishafim.
Kishafim. That's like magic thing.
Right.
Magician.
What question is Rashi answering, beginning with the words "V'rabotenu amru"? Our sages said. He's giving us the answer, but the question's implied.
Well, I'm just what Latehem means.
Compared to what?
Latehem.
Right. So now that Rashi told you what he thinks the word means, he's saying, and you astute reader, remember, particularly if you haven't been doing it as slow as Rabbi Kligfeld's Rashi class, you actually read that verse just 9 verses ago. Why are there two? They mean slightly different things. Latehem is when you get your magical work done through the demons in the room and in the universe, and lahatehem is when you get it done through actual magic. I want to share with you one of the rabbinic places, the Talmudic sources where this comes from. So let me just pull it up. Okay, this comes from Masechet Sanhedrin. Amar, so chapter, page 67b. Amar Rabbi Ibo bar Nagiri, Rabbi Chia bar Abba Belate, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Belatehem elu maaseh shedim, Belahatehem elu maaseh kshafim, V'chein hu omer ve'edlah ha'acher v'midhapechet. So this is the question that Rashi is dealing with is directly from the Talmud, and you have a chain of rabbis. Rabbi Ibu said Rabbi Abu, the son of Nagri, said the name of Chia bar Abba, that when we have these 2 verses, the latehem, you can see the translation here, words are describing acts of employing demons, which are invisible and their actions are therefore hidden, bala'at. So reading the la'at here in the Talmud different than when Rashi read it having to do with something quiet. But when it comes to lahatehem, these are direct acts of sorcery, which they did themselves, right? So what's interesting about this is that you have Rashi and the rabbis of the Talmud leaning into the methods that the Egyptian sorcerers used to do what ended up being interesting and impressive feats. And they had several methods. This is weird for the rabbis to say of the Egyptian sorcerers, they could employ the demons in the room, right? To suggest that the rabbis believed that there were demons that could be employed, or they could simply do it by, David Blaine, sleight of hand, their own sorcery, as if to say there are 2 methods and they're different than how God accomplishes things, but they're not non-existent. It's sort of a nod towards the notion that even other peoples and other cultures could harness the spiritual power of the world to get things done that would seem miraculous. Barry?
I was going to touch on that. They're opening up a can of worms, so to speak. They're admitting that such thing exists, that there are powers outside of God.
Yeah, yeah, and powers that can do things that mirror what God is doing on some level, right?
It just suggesting the existence of this is a big can of worms.
Right.
Well, if we, at the beginning of Torah, it says just to have God and not believe in other powers, it means they admit there was something else, but you shouldn't follow them. That's
Right.
all.
Right. When the Torah says, do not bow down to Elohehem, to their gods, there are two ways of reading that phrase. One is don't bow down to the things that they consider gods, which are not gods, or there are other spiritual forces in the world that are not as powerful as me, but they have earned the title Elohehem. Pay no attention to them, pay only attention to me, right? And we're not 100% sure which that meant in situ, right? When the verses first come by.
In Rashi and creation, God created evil. Some say this. And so this evil is independent of God. That God created it.
Draw the connection.
So
The demons of evil.
these demons is the power of evil that God created initially in Breshit and let it go independently.
And can be harnessed by Egyptian magicians.
And that's where the free choice comes. So you choose between either.
Okay, anything else on Latehem, Lahatehem? Okay,
No,
Jill,
but can you see if people can talk a bit louder? It's hard to hear, especially Barry.
yeah. And also, are you hearing any of the child's noises from outside? Are those coming?
No.
No, okay. Because it's nice having the windows open. We hear them, but I don't know if that's muting it. I'll see if next time we can get a microphone. I'm trying to figure out, I'm sure it's technologically possible, but I'm not sure. Okay, we have one more Rashi in this verse. Joel?
Yechazak lev paro lomar al yedei mechashut atem osim kan. That is to say, through the magic that you are doing here. Is that right?
That's what those words mean. And I have to figure out what it is that Rashi's saying that Pharaoh is saying.
So
So
he's saying it's not a stated verb, that it's an active verb, that these, whatever they did, hardened his heart even further. In other words, well, what God's doing is not so great because my magicians can duplicate it. Therefore, I am going to be even stronger in my position.
right, so very close, right? So I'm not sure Rashi is or is not weighing in on whether that is an active verb, but he's describing that the reason why Pharaoh's heart is either still or again chazak is because Pharaoh's inner monologue, which we're now getting a window into, is basically saying either to himself about Moshe and Aaron or to Moshe and Aaron, you think that's impressive? All you are doing, folks, is michashfut, which is the gerund form of lichashef, to do magic. You're doing magic tricks. And keep going, v'chi, v'teven.
Teven atem machnisim
Le'ofraim. Now, you may not know what this word means, but there is a very common English version of this
Yes.
rhetorical question. And what is it?
Calls to Newcastle.
Correct, right? What is what?
Bringing coals to Newcastle have to do with what does that mean?
What does it mean when people speak English use it? Because what is produced very abundantly in Newcastle?
I'm sorry, I remember that.
Coals. So when you're bringing coals to Newcastle, it's like, I don't know, bringing interruptions to the library minion. I don't know, would that be right? It's bringing something to a place that is already abundant with it, right? So the one thing that Newcastle does not need is coal, right? So this now, Rashi through the Talmud is inserting into Pharaoh's head a certain lack of a sense of being impressed by Moshe and Aaron. You did something, my folks did something, you all did the same thing. You want to impress me by bringing to Egypt that which Egypt already does rather well, because apparently there was this place called Ephraim that was well known to have good straw. And I want to show you the source of that also. Where is it? Okay. So if you look up Ephraim in the Talmud, in the Jastro, oh, it's very small. Yeah, I don't know if I can make that. Hector, are you listening? Hector, if you're listening, there's I have no idea how to get rid of that box.
You hit okay.
Okay.
I don't have
Hasn't the cursor to that
I don't have the
screen?
cursor to that screen.
I can see it okay.
Well, it's the words right underneath that box now. So Ephraim, which I know it's a little small here. Let's see if I can I zoom in? I'm not going to spend the time trying. There it is. I know it's still small. Ephraim. So Jastro says that it's compared to the town called Chapharaim in the 19th book, chapter of Joshua, Apharaim or Hepharim, and there are several places. This first citation is Menachot 8:1, right? Which is the Mishnah of Menachot 8:1. So let's look at Menachot 8:1. Kol korbanot hatzibur v'hayachid ba'im min haaretz u'michutz la'aretz. All public and private offerings can be brought either from the land of Israel or beyond the land. Min hechadash min hayashan. Very technical terms, which I don't want to go into. It could come from new produce and old produce. That's not just the way we use the words new and old in English, but it has to do with what year the produce is attached to. Chutz min haomer u'shtei halechem, except for the offerings of the omer, right, the days leading up to Shavuot, and the shewbread, the 2 loaves of bread that were in the temple every day. She'einan ba'in ela min hachadash min haaretz. Those 2 have to be brought from what's considered chadash property, and it has to be brought from the land. B'chulan einan ba'in ela min hamuvchar. But no matter which category, and they have to be brought from the best stuff. Bring the best stuff. Oh, is it blocked again up there? Sorry. Bring the best stuff I'm right over there, to the temple for your sacrifice. Ve'ezehu muchar. How do you know that you're getting the best property? The best produce? Well, if you want to get the best, get from Michmas Umizonicha, which apparently they were 2 towns that were known to have good produce. Actually, let me move this. It's not working. Alpha Lasolet. So alpha is what you think it means. It's the best. It's number 1 when it comes to fine grain. Shniya lehem. What was second when it came to the best fine grain in the world? Chofarim Babika. The place called Chofarim, which is also called Apharaim, our word, in the valley. So according to Mishnah Menachot, the second best place in all of ancient, extended Israel to get fine grain was Ephraim, and it was considered so good that look at this line from the Talmud on this Mishnah. On the phrase "V'kulan einan ba'od elamina muvchar," that all of these offerings, that thing really is annoying, isn't it? And the people on Zoom, you're not seeing this, but the people in the room are seeing something blocking the very thing I'm putting on the screen. What is that up there? What does it say?
This is a priest session sponsored by a sponsored session.
Okay.
Look at that.
Okay.
Not only does he know Rashi, he knows how to handle the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So on this quote from the Mishnah that all of these sacrifices have to be brought from the best stuff, etc. Amri le Yochana uMamre LeMoshe. Yochana and Mamre said to Moshe, from context, who do you want to guess Yochanan and Mamre are?
The Egyptian magician.
2 of the Egyptian sorcerers, right? The Talmud is imagining Yochanan and Mamre said to Moshe, Tevin ata machnis la'ofarayim. You are bringing straw to Opharaim, the second best place in all of ancient Judea to have straw. We don't need that here. So the Talmud imagines that it's Moshe's counterparts who are saying it to him. Rashi quotes this source or contracts the source in something a little more compact and says the reason why Pharaoh was self-assured in having his heart remain hard is because he's saying to himself, or he's saying to Moshe in his fantasy, you're not bringing anything novel here. You're actually bringing here the very thing that we actually do here well. It's like you're bringing straw to Opharayim. It's like you're bringing coals to Nukan.
It's like second-rate art.
Yeah. But how can he really be saying that, given that we talked about that the blood was not just in the Nile itself, but in all the tributaries and everything else? That's something that goes beyond what the magicians in Egypt could otherwise do, or even try to do. There would be no reason to do so.
No,
Maybe. I mean, we still haven't resolved completely what it is that the Torah meant when it says "Vayasu chen chartumei Mitzrayim." Maybe the Egypt's magicians, to bite your nose, to what is it, to it's the frick.
Cut off your
nose to spite your tongue, right? It's like to show how powerful they are. They also did things which continued to ruin their economy and their well-being, to show that they were as powerful, which would allow Pharaoh to say that so far the things that you've done, we can do too. Why would they want to do it? I don't know. How do they do it? That gets into the question of why the Torah wants to make space for the notion of there being supernatural things that can be done not with God, but it gives what we say in Hebrew a pitchon peh, an opening for Pharaoh to say, not so impressive. Or even if it's impressive, we do that. We're the winners of this magic act. We invented this stuff.
Not a big deal.
Right.
but
Rosemary?
we have always behind our mind that God makes his heart harden. And I have experienced this in my life when God hardens somebody's heart. Even if you show anything, they don't see because God has hardened. And there is a higher aim to that.
Yes.
I mean, if God wants me like to clean the table, you can do everything. But if I have to clean the table, I will clean because he hardens the heart of people to throw more dirt things on the table. So finally I will do. It's not that Pharaoh is relying too much. It's his ego relying on his magicians. He knows, but his heart has been hardened and he can't do anything. He doesn't have the power.
Yeah. Alan?
Yeah. In the Silverman, in the actual text in verse 22, they translated it as, and Pharaoh's heart was hard. And yet, when Silverman talks about Rashi's comments, he says, Pharaoh's heart was hardened.
Yeah.
What's the difference between saying his heart was hard and his heart was hardened?
What's the grammatical difference or the content difference?
Content difference.
Can I give the answer?
Go ahead, Rosemary.
The hard heart can be softened. But if your heart is hardened by God, you can't do a damn thing.
You could also argue it the other way, that a hard heart is simply the way this person's heart is. If it's a hardened heart, it means that if it was hardened from having been soft, maybe it can be softened from having been hard, right? But I think what's going on there is really a Picayune grammatical situation, trying to figure out how to translate ve'echazak lev paro, because it's a verb in that category of verbs that describes a state of being as opposed to a direct act.
Okay, I just find it surprising that the one source would have it in two different ways.
Yeah. Renee? You just muted yourself, Renee.
One can be more of a physiological, like became hard physiologically, and the hardened one is more of an emotional state.
What do you mean by physiologically hard?
Like physically, it became hard. Like the organ itself became hard.
Right.
This doctor is more than concerned.
Right.
No.
Joel, finish the phrase. We actually spoke it all out, but we didn't say we read all the words. So after in the Rashi where it says Teven atem machnisim la'Ephraim.
Okay, you brought straw to Ephraim, Shikulat Teven, a city that is, all of it is straw.
Right, and again in the Talmud, it's not that the city was all straw, but that it was known for highest quality straw. Yeah.
Afatem Nevi'im Mach Shefut Mitzrayim, and here too, you're bringing magicry to Egypt. Shekula Shafim, that is full of magic.
We've got this here, right? So even though what you did temporarily ruined the water of Egypt, you did something that is familiar to us. We're not going to submit. I'm not going to let my slaves go for this. You're going to have to do much more to get me to let my slaves go. And this is all Rashi's way of saying why it was that the lev of Paro, the heart of Pharaoh, was either still or once again hard. Okay. People will, give themselves lots of internal reasons why not to make a change, right? So this also might be a little window into the psychology of Pharaoh, that he's convinced himself that what he's seen done by Moshe and Aaron is not significantly more impressive than what he's able to do with his own people. Okay? Comments, questions on that?
Remember how you were saying that when famous rabbis write books about their stuff, they usually use puns in their name?
Yeah.
So when Lev writes a book, you can call it Vayachazek Lev.
Yes. I will tell him that when I see him in a month. Okay. Joanna, do you want to read verse 23?
Sure.
Thank you.
Vayifen Paro vayavo el beito velo shat libo gam lazot. Paro turned, and an interesting choice for, obviously it means went to his house, but came to his house, the vayavo, and not vayelech. Velo sat libo. To be quite literal, his heart was not put down by this. He didn't pay attention to this. I would almost translate it, in fact, similar to when we talk in Hebrew, lasim lev, to pay attention. He didn't pay attention to this.
Correct. That verb shat, shin taf or shin vav taf in biblical Hebrew is to turn to heed, to set. It can also sometimes be referred to where one places one's hand, or where one one lays one's hand, is having to do with placement or focus or attention. So he turned, right? He kind of did a 180. He comes into his house, and he does not turn his heart or let his heart pay attention to, or be diverted, let his heart be diverted. Gam lazot. How do you get to translate gam lazot?
Also to this.
Also to this. What's interesting? What else is interesting in terms of the words used in this verse, aside from the turning and the shat?
The also. So what was the first thing that he didn't pay attention to?
Very good. So gam can mean in the Torah an intensifier, but sometimes it just means another one, right? And also implies an antecedent. So if the gam here is implying an antecedent, what do we think the precedent is? The magical moment with the snake and the rod. That's one possibility. Anything else?
And then the initial request, was that the same encounter? No. That was the first time they asked, was with the rod?
Right. So because the reason why it raises a question is that we are in plague number what of 10?
1.
Oh.
Right. So we're in plague number 1 of 1. And when we read this, we know we're in plague number 1 of 1, and therefore the gam is an interesting word, because our first reaction might be, well, what had there been previous? And one of the more common reactions to that is, there hasn't been a plague, but there has been a show of magical force, right? So that's a possibility. Let's see what.
And also just the verbiage that there was also the announcement that God was going to be, that Pharaoh was going to be hardened, and that things were going to happen.
Right. And if the Torah
not
says,
specifics.
The Torah says that Pharaoh also didn't pay attention to this, there has to be a way of saying, in addition to the time when Pharaoh didn't pay attention to that. And so what is the that this is in addition to? So look at the Rashi, Joanna, on Gam Lazot.
Just 1 second. I also think, by the way, as I'm getting to the Rashi, that I wonder if, like, what he didn't pay attention to at first was, he seems in like Exodus 1 very taken by surprise at the growth of Bnei Yisrael. Like all of a sudden, there's this numerous and populous nation in front of him that he wasn't kind of paying attention to all along. And so to speak, in a very different way, it was kind of a mistake on his part not to pay attention. And similarly here too, it will be a mistake on his part not to pay attention from now.
Very, very interesting callback. Thank you for that. Before you finish read the Rashi, I see Rick's hand up. So let's see if Rick wants to insert something before the Rashi.
Also a callback, a little bit. Can I do that? I'm realizing that if we go all the way back to chapter 4, the beginning, when God says, these are the tricks I want you to show Pharaoh, the first one was the serpent from the rod, okay? And the second one was his hand getting leprous, which he never does in front of Pharaoh. I want to point that out. And the third one, this is verse 9. And the third trick, you can take the water and turn it into blood. And at that point, Moses doesn't even react to that. He goes, I can't do that. I can't speak, right? I mean, it's like this major plague, and Moses doesn't even focus on that. But now here we are actually announcing the blood, and it's the major thing. And Moses didn't even react to it back then. I just thought it was interesting that again, the leprous hand doesn't get used at all. That's all.
Great, thank you for that call back. Joanna, read please the Rashi and Gam Lazot.
Gam Lazot, lemofet hamateh shenapach letanin velo lazeh shel dam. I would kind of translate this as, kind of inserting a few words. The first thing he didn't pay attention to was the wondrous miracle when the rod turned into a snake, and then now he also didn't pay attention to this one of the dam.
Very good, exactly as Barry had said, and this connects to what Rick had said before, because we actually did have this phrase. As Rick showed us, when we got to the moments right after the rod and the snake trick, the Torah said, that Pharaoh's heart was either still or again hardened and didn't pay attention to him, exactly as God had said. And so this allows, exactly as God had said would happen, and this allows us to have the sense of Gam Lazot. And also, again, this time, it wasn't plague then, it was warning, but to neither of these two moments where God has, through Moshe and Aaron, shown his intended superiority, neither times did Pharaoh say, I'm yielding even a little bit. Meaning, it's not even, I think sometimes when we think about the 10 plagues in our minds without paying attention to every single verse, we think of it as an undulation, right? A melting of the heart, a hardening of the heart, a melting of the heart, a hardening heart, or the opposite direction. And so far, we actually haven't seen any melting, right? It's just hard and then hard again. It's not like he had conceded a bit and then it stiffened. It's just, so far, there's been nothing to move Pharaoh away from his position that he's in charge and God is not. Barry.
So I think you said it just now, that you asked a question that really stunned me. What was the first plague? So the rod, that's a trick. And so Pharaoh, he doesn't know this is plague yet, the blood. He just treats this as another trick.
Right. Meaning that, I see what you're saying, that from Pharaoh's perspective, this is not, we had a warning and now we have a plague, but this is just two things in a row in the similar category, right. And because he doesn't know the story that's coming.
That's why the
right.
straw and all
yeah.
that.
He doesn't know there are locusts on the horizon.
Yeah.
He hasn't seen the movie, right?
And-
Either. He hasn't seen either movie.
Yeah, and
He should start with Cecil B. DeMille. Yeah.
and perhaps Pharaoh doesn't know the full extent yet that the blood is everywhere in
Yeah.
all the rivers and all the tributaries and everything else. So we think, oh, this is just like the snake
Yeah.
from the rod, no big deal. This is no big deal
Interesting.
because he doesn't know about it.
Right. So hold that thought when we read the next verse, because the next verse is going to throw a curve into our understanding of the basic plot and what is happening in real time in Egypt. Joel, is your hand up?
No.
Okay. Look at us. We're going to read a third verse today. I can't believe it. Those who missed it today will never believe how much they missed. Verse 24. Let's see, whom have we not heard from today? Barbara, do you want to read verse 24?
Muted.
Thanks. I can try. I mean, I can read it, but let's see about translation.
Help you, don't worry.
Vayachparo kol mitrayim svivot hayur mayim lishtot ki lo yachlu lishtot mimi may haya or.
Good. I'll help you along here. The root of Vayach Peru is the three-letter root Chet, Pei, Resh, Chafar. Chafar means to
That
To
one I don't know.
dig. Okay, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
plural.
okay.
So and
So
the
then all the Egyptians dug
right, and they dug Saviv.
the
Saviv.
boat. Okay, yeah,
What does Saviv mean?
around, yeah.
Round, right? Shabbat Sovev is Shabbat in the round, right? So they dug Svivot Hayaor, around the river, the
Okay.
Nile.
No,
Okay.
the river, because it doesn't say Nile, that's for darn sure, but the translation says Nile.
Right, because the Torah's word for the Nile is the Yaor, right? Even though we use the word Yaor to mean something more general. And
Okay.
what did they dig?
To dig water, to
Lishtot.
drink, because they weren't able to drink from the I know the
Mayim. It's Mayim, the plural of Mayim.
Oh, okay, from the water of the Nile of the river.
Very good. Okay, so we know what these words mean, but if you're even a half step ahead of me, you're already recognizing the question on the verse, right? The words mean that all the Egyptians dug around the Nile water for potable drinking water. Why? Because they couldn't drink from the waters of the Nile.
But presumably all the water they drank that they dig for is going to be bloody, right?
Right. So if we believe what we read in verses 19 and 20, no matter where they dig, there's blood precisely because of what the Nile is, right? The Nile is a Yaor, which spills over its banks, and all of the waters in the reservoirs and the Agams and the Nahars and the Yaors, and even in the Eitzim, the Avanim, even the places where they already had water in their wooden and stone cups had already been bloody. So are we being told that there's several possibilities, that when we said before that there was water everywhere in Egypt, we didn't mean it comprehensively? Can you close that? I can't. I love hearing the sounds of the kids, but I can't think. Can you close that one, Stuart? Either are we being told that it wasn't as comprehensive as we thought, or are we being told that they are digging for water, but they're digging fruitlessly for water? Like they're digging out of desperation, but they're not able to? Or are we being told that somehow, even though verses 19 and 20 showed a comprehensiveness, if you dug deep enough, you could find fresh water, which is always the case, right? It's not clear, but there's an immediate plot problem given our understanding of how widespread the plague was up above. Barry?
All flowing water was blood, but sieving it, or filtering it through sand caused it to be clean, or relatively clean.
Well, we don't know that. We
Right.
don't know that.
Right. And verse 19 seemed to be pretty comprehensive. Let's remind ourselves, right? Verse 19. Kach matcha unatei yadcha al meimei Mitzrayim. Hold your hand over all the waters of Egypt, on their nahars, their rivers, on Yorehem and the tributaries, on Agmehem, the reservoirs, the chomik ve'mehem, and every gathering of water, and there'll be blood. V'hayadam b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and there will be blood for all the land of Egypt, even in the wooden and the stone vessels, right? So if you had read verse 19 and you were asked to predict, like, could an Egyptian just go into his backyard, dig a little bit and find fresh water? Our answer would be no. Right. But now in verse 24, we're being told that either they did or they tried to. Right. That's what that is the critical question. Are we being informed that it happened or they attempted to make it happen? Joanna?
I wonder if there's another possible read here, reading this purposefully in conjunction with the verse that comes before and inserting some missing text, which is Paro was not paying attention to what was going on, but God was. And what does that mean? Paro thus far wasn't impressed with, God's tricks. So Paro went home a little bit too quickly because God then decided he would make water available, not in the Nile itself, but around it. That would be something that the Khartoumim, if they did the same trick, wouldn't be able to do to keep the water right around the Nile and, the tributaries and underground wells or whatever clean, and only the Nile affected. And, if there's something going on here, like, look, all the more power of Hashem at what he's able to do here.
It's a fascinating read, and it's sensitive to the potential problem in the verse. When you started speaking, I thought you were going to say something slightly different. So I'm going to fill in what I filled in my head when you started speaking, which is that Pharaoh has made up his mind that this is not an emergency. And he turns around and goes home into his 4-poster bed, right? But in the next verse, we're being told by the narrator that it is an emergency because all of Pharaoh's subjects are not saying, oh, they did it, we did it, it's all the same. They are feverishly and possibly in vain digging as much as they possibly can because there's no potable water in Egypt. This is not a you did a trick, I did a trick. This is near catastrophe. And I think I'm impacted by that read, both in terms of what I thought you were going to say, Joanna, and the commentary we're going to read in a second. Rashi is quiet on this verse, which I find interesting. Rashi doesn't see any problem or anything curious about this. He pipes up the next verse, but not this verse. But there's one commentary I want to read with you.
Let me just ask a question or make a comment. In 19, which you just read, it says all bodies of water, or whereas water in the soil may not be considered a body of water. So if they were looking for something that's not a body of water, although then it can be said if you pulled up water from it, then it became a body of water. So it could go either way.
There's no certain resolution of those two verses.
Absolutely.
One could answer it that way, but one could respond to that answer. Dam b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, blood in all of Egypt, should be comprehensive even underneath the ground.
Yeah,
Alan?
And it even went to the vessels.
Right.
The wood, and if it goes to wooden vessels, the wood would think, well, of course, it's going to go to water that's adjacent to the Nile.
Well, I would say that the Nile and any water that originated from the Nile would become blood.
Yeah.
But underground water does not originate from the Nile.
Let me hear Joanna, and then I do want to read this one commentary before we're out of time. So Joanna, and then I'm going to put a commentary on the screen.
Without getting too far ahead, just the first word of verse 25, Vayimale, I'm struck that it's Vayimale Shivat Yamim and not just like, oh, Acharei Shivat Yamim. And it takes me to the verse in Esther where it talks about how Vayimleu Yemei Tamu Kehen, right? They had these prescribed days of getting ready. They were very purposeful and intent days, right? Like it wasn't just sort of random. And I wonder if it's calling attention, like pay attention to everything that happened in these 7 days and the subtle changes that varied, from the start of the plague to the end of the plague, because every bit of this was with God's intent.
Yeah. we say Baruch Shekivan, right? Blessed be you who anticipated what another sage is going to say. Rashi is going to say something similar on that verse, which we'll get to next week. But let's end this week by bringing up the Ha'amek Davar. This is the beautiful commentary on the Torah by the rabbi called the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was in Lithuania, late 19th, early 20th century. And his commentary is called Ha'amek Davar, go deep into the thing. Right, so we have a verse that the Egyptians dug around the river to find drinking water, and his comment is based on a very precise reading of what syntax seems to be lacking in the verse. Okay, so I'm on the right side of the screen here. Dat Mefarshim, the basic idea of the commentators is, quote, Vayachparu, they dug Milashon chafirat adama, digging in the ground, because that's actually how we understand the word chofer, is to dig in the ground. So the classic way of thinking is that they took out their shovels and they dug. Aval, he says, but imkein, if that's the case, chaser tevat lahotzi, the word to bring out is missing from the phrase. And what he's saying is that if you're going to say that they dug in the ground, then the Torah should have said they dug in the ground in order to extract water. Mayim lishtot, to extract water to drink. Shaharei ein chofrin hamayim el ha'adama. You don't dig the water, but rather the ground. And the verse is written as if to say, what did they dig? They dug the water. So if it meant they was to dig to get water, then it should have been Vayachbaru kol mitzrayim sfoti, or lahotzi mayim lishot, to remove water from the ground. A verb is missing. Lachein nireh, therefore it seems to me, shehu milashon vayachbaru lanu et haaretz. This is from earlier on in Breshit. There's another use of the word chafar, which doesn't mean take out your shovel and dig in the ground, but rather demashma'o chipush, to search, to try to locate something that is hard to locate. Uperush, and therefore the interpretation would be here, Vayachpashu kol mitzrayim hayoshvim svot hayor, all the Egyptians who were dwelling near the river, they searched in vain, feverishly, desperately, mayim lishtot. They were trying to find water drink, mimei hayor, from the waters of the Nile. Aval sharei mayim hay. And then he finishes the comment, but they weren't able to, right? So his way of resolving it is saying, it's similar to what we talked about before. According to verse 23, national emergency is over. Pharaoh goes back to his home. In verse 24, you've got the entire population not realizing that no matter how deep they dig, they're not going to be successful, but they're trying, they're looking any way they possibly can, because you can live without food, you can't live without water, right? So the way we end this class is plague one kind of done, Pharaoh unimpressed with plague one, and depending on how you read verse 24, either the people having found an ingenious way to get around the blood in the water, depending on what you think Vayachparu means, or the people, as is always the case, suffering much more than the one in charge, right? You can look at any headline today right now, right? The Ukrainian people and the Russian people on both sides are suffering much more from the war than either Putin or Zelensky are, right? So the people are parched because they have nothing to drink, and somehow Pharaoh feels this will all be over soon. Joanna, last comment, or was that a rehand or a same hand?
No, a new hand. It's interesting that there's a theory about Hebrew. I think it's not accepted by all scholars, that Hebrew originally started as a two-root system. So when you have two root letters that are the same and the third, they actually all go back to an original two-root system. So it's interesting that the words lachpor and lechapes differ by only the one letter.
Right, and we've talked about that a lot in the past. And there's certain families of roots that it's more obvious, like pei resh and pei kuf verbs, and the difference between chafar and chafesh is not just that it's one letter, but there are back-to-back letters in the alphabet, right? So it's the beginning chet pei, and then are you doing the penultimate letter in the alphabet or the anti-penultimate letter in the alphabet? And they're probably cousin meanings.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.